Imagine taking like a massive supercharged V12 engine and dropping it into this perfectly engineered Formula One car. But the driver behind the wheel is completely blindfolded.
Right, just a total disaster waiting to happen.
Exactly. I mean, they can press the accelerator as hard as they want. They can generate incredible horsepower, but all that effort really just ensures they're going to hit the wall faster and, much harder.
Yeah, it's terrifying when you put it like that.
It is. And if you've ever felt like you're running on a treadmill, working incredibly hard, but somehow not moving forward, this deep dive is exactly what you need.
Absolutely.
Today, we're analyzing this really fascinating piece of source material. It's simply titled Day 115, and it reads like this master manual for deliberate living.
It really does. I mean, the range of voices in it is wild.
Yeah, it pulls from Stoic philosophers, Zen mystics, novelists, and even like elite athletic coaches. The mission today is to decode how all these totally different disciplines point to the exact same mechanics of how we move through the world.
And, the synthesis in this essay is just incredibly dense. When you encounter a collection of quotes from such wildly different eras and fields, you usually expect this fairly shallow, inspirational grab bag.
Right, like an internet mood board or something.
Exactly. But the architecture here is highly structured. It builds this sequential, interlocking argument that isn't just concerned with the actions you take, but the underlying machinery of how you are being while you take them.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the entire architecture you just mentioned is built on a single foundational quote from Lauren Landau. He's an elite athletic coach.
Oh, yeah. This quote is the anchor for everything else.
Yeah, so Landau says the more rhythmic that we are, the more elastic we become. Get good at grooving just a handful of speed drills, always work on fundamentals. And then he says, fundamentals are never mastered. Pay attention to posture. Posture is key. Joint position equals muscle function.
That's so good.
Right. And on a literal level, he is giving biomechanical advice to sprinters.
He is. But the essay brilliantly pivots that biomechanical truth into a universal philosophy. Joint position equals muscle function. If you look at the mechanics of the human body, if your femur isn't seated correctly in the hip socket, your muscles simply cannot fire with their full potential.
Because the alignment to reality is just off.
Exactly. They'll compensate, they'll strain, and eventually they'll tear. And this essay posits that the exact same mechanism operates on the mental and spiritual planes.
So before you worry about speed, you really need rhythm.
Right. And before you can find rhythm, you need the correct form. How you hold yourself, your fundamental posture, determines what you're actually capable of.
That implies that mental alignment and physical alignment aren't just like similar concepts. They're actually the exact same mechanism operating in different arenas.
Yes, exactly.
Which is wild because we are obsessed with the grind. We treat effort like the ultimate virtue. Hustle culture tells you that if there's a problem, the solution is always to just push harder.
Just put your head down and work.
Right. But if your mental joint position is facing the wrong direction, pushing harder is the worst thing you can do. It's like putting a bigger engine in a car while driving blindfolded. More effort just means a faster crash.
This is exactly where the essay brings in Seth Godin's concept, the thing about effort, which directly dismantles our whole cultural obsession with the grind.
I loved this part. It was so validating.
Yeah, Godin points out a devastatingly simple truth. Going faster is mathematically useless if you're running in the wrong direction.
It seems so obvious when you say it out loud.
Right. But we tend to view strategy as this corporate luxury, something you do at an annual retreat. But Godin defines strategy as the hard, uncomfortable commitment to seeing the race course before you even begin to exert energy.
Meaning effort is always downstream of strategy.
Always. And the text uses Godin's metaphor of a surfer to explain this, which really exposes the flaw in the try-harder mentality.
Yeah, because a surfer doesn't paddle out into the ocean and try to physically fight the water to create a wave. I mean, that would be insane.
They just drown.
Right. Strategy is seeing the race course before you begin. The skilled surfer reads the water. She positions herself correctly relative to her environment. She sets her posture, and then she lets the physics of the wave do the heavy lifting.
And we have to ask why we are so resistant to being the surfer. Like, why do we default to fighting the water?
Honestly, I think it's because psychologically, grinding is comfortable.
Yes, effort is highly visible. If you're exhausted at the end of the day, your ego feels justified. You feel productive.
Even if you accomplish nothing of value.
Exactly. Strategy, however, requires stopping. It requires you to sit quietly and look at the map, which carries the terrifying risk of realizing you've been walking in the wrong direction for, like, 5 years.
Oh, man, that is a scary thought.
It is. And Landau's coaching wisdom echoes here. You don't just arrive at alignment. Fundamentals are never mastered. Maintaining alignment is a daily active discipline, so you don't efficiently build a life you secretly hate.
But, God and surfer metaphor assumes the ocean is at least somewhat predictable. It assumes you can just calmly read the waves.
Which reality is not.
Right. In reality, another surfer cuts you off. The wind shifts, your board breaks. You can have the most impeccable strategy and perfect mental posture, but when the wave ruthlessly crashes on top of you, human emotion takes over.
Yeah, reactivity completely derails the alignment.
And this leads to the next big challenge in the text. There's a striking quote from Cato the Elder in this section, via Ryan Holiday. It paints such a visceral picture. Cato says, "An angry man opens his mouth and shuts his eyes."
Such a brilliant visual.
It really is. When we react out of pure ego or sudden anger, we're literally blinding ourselves. We lose all peripheral vision, our focus narrows to the threat, and we can no longer see the race course we just spent all that time strategizing over.
What's fascinating here is the precise mechanical remedy that Seneca and Holiday prescribed for this blindness. It is a single, notoriously difficult action.
Delay.
Yes, delay. Now, we need to be very clear about the psychology here. Delay does not mean suppression.
That's a huge distinction.
Huge. The essay points out that if a child lies to you, you still have to teach them that lying is wrong. You must deal with reality. Suppression is just swallowing the anger, which, just ferments into resentment and eventually detonates.
So if it isn't suppression, what is the actual mechanism of delay? Like, why does waiting cure the blindness?
It has to do with the refractory period of human emotion. When your amygdala is hijacked by a perceived threat, your brain is flooded with neurochemicals that literally limit your prefrontal cortex, your logical brain.
So you're temporarily, biologically incapable of complex strategy.
Exactly. Delay works because it reinserts the self between the stimulus and the response. It forces a wedge of time that allows the neurochemistry to cool down.
Like writing a furious email but forcing yourself to leave it in the drafts folder overnight.
Yes, the delay itself is the discipline. It gives your eyes time to open back up before your mouth does.
That concept of the ego blinding us connects really well to the Zen parable the essay brings in from Anthony DeMello. It's a story called Sterility. Have you heard this one before?
Yes, profound.
So a disciple asks his master why he is constantly scorning the profound intellectual pearls of wisdom that scholars debate. And the master replies, "Have you ever known curls to grow when planted in a field?"
The shift in perspective there is it's incredible. Recognizing how the ego weaponizes knowledge.
Right, because the master isn't anti-intellectual.
No, not at all. He's warning us that the ego loves to use knowledge as armor. If you memorize facts just to sound authoritative in a meeting or to protect yourself from looking foolish, that knowledge remains sterile.
It's a pearl.
Exactly. It's hard, shiny, highly valuable to society, but biologically dead. Knowledge cannot transform into wisdom until it finds soil. And the soil is the vulnerability of lived experience.
But to be the soil, to actually let the events of your life penetrate and change you, that requires a massive softening of our defenses. We have to be teachable.
Which is terrifying for the ego.
It is. And the essay closes this loop on reactivity with Epictetus, who points out that our anger and grief almost exclusively live in one specific location, the gap between what we want to happen and what is actually happening.
The friction of reality not meeting our expectations. That gap is the engine of human misery.
Yeah.
And Epictetus, alongside Seneca's concept of delay, offers gratitude as the primary tool to bridge that gap. Gratitude forces the brain out of the hypothetical what should be and forcefully grounds it in the objective reality of what is present. It interrupts the reactive cycle.
Which brings up a critical tension in the text. To bridge that gap, to be the soil, we have to remain entirely open to being wrong. We have to be teachable.
Yeah.
But the essay introduces a famous quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Oh, this part is tricky.
Yeah, I have to play devil's advocate here. The quote is, "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." Doesn't being yourself fundamentally imply stubbornly refusing to change? How does that fit with teachability?
It certainly reads that way on the surface. If you take a shallow reading of Emerson, you get a really convenient excuse for rigidity. This is just how I am, take it or leave it.
Right, exactly.
But the text argues for a much deeper, more difficult interpretation. To truly be yourself in the Emersonian sense, you first have to actually know yourself.
Which is not easy.
No. It demands a ruthless inventory of your own biases, your flaws, and your conditioned responses. That demands immense humility, which is the absolute prerequisite for being teachable.
But wait, how do you distinguish between growing on your own terms and just being blind to your own toxic traits? Like, if I'm a deeply impatient, irritable person, I could easily use Emerson to justify snapping at my team because I'm just being authentic to who I am.
And that is precisely where you have to separate the defensive ego from the authentic self. The self that Emerson says is worth protecting isn't the reactionary bundle of bad habits that is terrified of judgment. It's the core self that is capable of growth.
Okay, that makes sense.
The text brings in Jim Kwik, the memory coach, to clarify this mechanic. Kwik argues that there's no such thing as a good memory or a bad memory. There is only a trained memory or an untrained one.
Oh, wow, which completely dismantles the fixed mindset. If I say I have a bad memory, I'm claiming a fixed state. I'm off the hook. I don't have to try.
Exactly the point. The ego desperately clings to fixed traits, whether it's I have a bad memory or I'm just an impatient person, because the alternative is acknowledging that you are untrained.
And being untrained implies that you must do the work to change.
Yes. Lauren Landau's coaching principle reinforces this again. Fundamentals are never mastered. You are not fixed, whether you think you're smart or dumb, talented or untalented. You are a system in process.
A system in process. I love that.
Teachability is the terrifying acceptance that you're never finished and you must remain porous to the world around you.
I want to pause and map out the architecture of this essay for you listening, because it actually includes a visual map in the text that ties all of this together.
It's a really helpful diagram.
Yeah, so imagine 3 distinct inputs. You have direction before effort at the top, you have teachability on one side, and ego and reactivity on the other. All 3 of these inputs funnel inward, pointing directly into a single central hub.
And that hub is labeled motivation.
Right. Once your posture is right and your ego is in check, you must examine the fuel in your engine. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It really does.
To define the central hub of motivation, the text uses a quote from the mystic Osho. He says, "Don't move the way fear makes you move. Move the way love makes you move. Move the way joy makes you move." It asks you to consider, what is the quality of the energy behind your effort?
Because on the exterior, fear and love can produce completely identical behavior.
Wait, really? Identical?
Oh, absolutely. Consider 2 ambitious professionals who both work 12-hour days and produce flawless results. Person A is driven by a paralyzing fear of failure, financial ruin, and the terror of falling behind their peers.
Okay, a very common scenario.
Right. Now, person B is driven by a deep intrinsic fascination with the problems they are solving. From the outside, the market rewards them both equally. They both look like disciplined, focused high performers.
But the interior reality is entirely different.
Completely different. Person A's discipline is essentially an extended trauma response. It's just slowly burning out their nervous system. But person B is being replenished by the work itself.
That brings us to the essay's brilliant design argument regarding lifestyle design and addiction. It argues that white-knuckling your way through a vice using willpower is mathematically doomed to fail.
Yes, because willpower is a finite cognitive resource. It's like a muscle, it fatigues. If fear of the consequence is your only deterrent, your ego will eventually deplete and you will relapse.
The essay suggests that you don't fight the vice morally or directly. You design a lifestyle where you look forward to what you are doing more than you look forward to the vice.
It's a mechanism of dopamine replacement rather than dopamine deprivation. If you are pulled forward by a genuine joy or a deeply loved pursuit, the vice simply loses its gravitational pull.
You don't defeat it, you outcompete it neurologically.
Exactly. Joy is a sustainable fuel source. Fear is a corrosive one.
That perfectly explains the wonderful anecdote about G.K. Chesterton included in this section. Chesterton was this prolific writer who believed in the practice of saying grace before everything.
Not just meals.
Right. Not just a solemn prayer before dinner. He said we should say grace before a concert, before a boxing match, even before the simple act of dipping a pen into ink.
I love that image. Dipping a pen in ink.
It's so vivid. And it wasn't about religious piety at all. It was a psychological mechanism. It was about perpetual anticipation and a joyful, forward-leaning posture. He was ensuring his actions were fueled by love for the act itself.
But that forward-leaning posture forces a final structural question. We have our mental joint position aligned. We've delayed our reactivity. We remain teachable. And we are burning joy instead of fear.
But where is this finely tuned vehicle actually traveling?
Right. What is the overarching container for all this movement?
The text introduces Stephen Cressfield for this, arguing that the hero's journey is the fundamental story of every human life. From Adam and Eve to Ziggy Stardust, the journey is the overarching structure containing all these themes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains the quote from filmmaker John Borman, who defines passion as the becoming of a person.
The becoming of a person, not just a feeling.
Exactly. We casually use the word passion to describe a fleeting enthusiasm, like, oh, I'm passionate about this new hobby. But Borman positions passion as a trajectory. It's a direction of travel.
You don't arrive at the destination unchanged.
No. When you submit to the hero's journey, the entire point is that you do not arrive as the same person who left.
And you cannot have that transformation without friction. The final section of the essay opens with the aphorism, "Without the darkness, we would never come to know the light." It sounds like a greeting card at first glance, honestly.
It does. But in the context of the hero's journey, it is a structural mandate. It's the absolute necessity of the dark forest phase of the myth.
You can't skip the ordeal.
No, you can't bypass it. The period of struggle, the moment where your strategy fails and your ego flares up, is required. Because if you didn't experience the friction, the soil wouldn't get turned over. The pearl would never break open.
So you can't control the fact that reality will introduce suffering and obstacles.
But you have total control over the posture you hold as you move through them. The ultimate shift this essay demands is moving from the anxious transactional question of what do I have to get done today to the profound structural question of what am I becoming?
So what does this all mean? We've covered everything from the biomechanics of a sprinter to the neurological refractory period of anger, all the way to the architecture of myth. But the true utility of this deep dive isn't just a grab bag of inspiring quotes.
No, it's a unified manual for living deliberately.
Set the bar incredibly low for today. Nobody's going to get out of your way, and the day won't be perfect. Traffic will be bad. You will be misunderstood. The wave will crash.
It always does.
But if you hold the right posture, keep a quiet ego, and move via joy, today just becomes another meaningful scene in your becoming.
Maintain your posture. Joint position equals muscle function. See the waves before you surf them. Stay teachable. And like Chesterton, say grace before you dip the pen.
As we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to explore on your own. It's not explicitly answered in the text, but it builds on everything we've discussed. If passion is truly the becoming of a person, and today is just a scene in your hero's journey, look at the actions you took this morning before you started listening to this. Based purely on those actions, what kind of hero are you becoming by tonight?